During one peaceful evening, relatives assembled near the dining area, completely unaware that behind each grin and morsel existed hidden darkness. Beneath the surface of festivity lurked decades of deception, infidelity, and revelations so catastrophic they remained irreversible. That gathering wouldn't conclude with joy. Instead, it would finish with events raising one chilling question. How thoroughly do we understand those sharing our residence? She entered the world during a pleasant Sunday afternoon in July 1989 within Jackson, Mississippi. Her mother labored extended periods at a restaurant while her stepfather transported cargo between states. Their dwelling was cramped, disputes were frequent, and finances perpetually insufficient. During her teenage years, she expressed sentiments causing friends to question her priorities. Affection is pleasant, but affection doesn't cover expenses. I refuse to spend existence impoverished. She voiced that philosophy repeatedly, transforming it into her guiding principle. By her early 20s, it shaped every choice she pursued. She desired escape from hardship. Her aspirations weren't connected to education or profession. They centered on appearance, fashionable clothing, vacations witnessed digitally, the comfort of women unconcerned about housing payments or outstanding invoices. That represented her aspiration. Attention arrived effortlessly. Men observed her everywhere she traveled. But her interest remained focused on those appearing capable of providing more. Comfort equaled affection to her. Security represented romance. And if a man lacked resources, she believed she owed him nothing emotional. He, conversely, had constructed his existence on contrasting principles. Born during a Tuesday in May 1987 within Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Jerome was primarily nurtured by his grandmother. His father vanished when he reached 6. His mother, frequently ill, couldn't maintain employment sufficiently long to provide sustenance. By 16, Jerome was already working the local automotive facility, cleaning floors, removing grease from his hands nightly, and preserving his meager earnings to assist his grandmother. Education didn't captivate him, but labor did. And despite possessing little, people characterized him as reliable, compassionate, and unwilling to abandon anyone. His aspiration was straightforward. He once informed a colleague, "I don't require wealth. I simply want to provide a woman a residence where she never experiences loneliness." To some, it sounded modest, but to Jerome, it represented everything. That perspective made him vulnerable to a woman who didn't embrace his simplicity. Their paths intersected in September 2012 at a community barbecue on a Saturday. He was operating the grill for his cousin, removing perspiration from his brow as children raced around the yard. She arrived later wearing a fitted sundress, nails manicured, her phone buzzing in her hand. A friend made the introduction. "This is Jerome," they said. He offered her a plate with a tentative smile. She accepted it without much more than acknowledgement. For him, that was sufficient to activate his heart. For her, he was just another man in the gathering, the one she might retain nearby. From the beginning, their dynamic was unbalanced. He leaned forward, eager to understand her. She leaned backward, only partially listening. He discussed music, about repairing vehicles, about existence in Louisiana. She scrolled through her phone, responding with brief statements. But when her vehicle wouldn't start the following week, Jerome was the person she contacted. He appeared, tools in hand, refusing payment for the repair. When she complained about being short on groceries, he brought bags to her door. He was useful. And though she didn't feel affection, she decided usefulness had its value. Her friends noticed the mismatch. One evening, sitting on a porch with her closest girlfriend, she was warned. "Girl, he's sweet, but you know he ain't got nothing. You're going to get tired real fast." She smirked, sipping her drink. "I know, but sometimes you got to keep the ones who worship you. They'll do anything to prove they're worth it." That confession never reached Jerome. To him, every favor was a step closer to winning her heart. By late 2013, the relationship looked official. Jerome posted photos of them online, calling her "my blessing." She posted fewer of him, but enjoyed the attention of being adored. His family accepted her warmly. Hers was less convinced. Her mother, especially, held unspoken doubts, not just about Jerome, but about what her daughter was hiding. Already, a secret was growing in the shadows, one that would determine everything. Because while Jerome worked long hours at the auto shop, she entertained calls from someone much closer than anyone would imagine. It wasn't just a fling. It was a dangerous tie to someone inside her own household, someone trusted by her mother, who crossed lines that never should have been crossed. She told herself it was just a thrill, nothing serious. But thrill, in her case, turned into something irreversible. In December of that year, cracks began to show. A cousin spotted her leaving a cheap motel on the south side of town. Furious, the cousin confronted her the next day. "Don't play with me. You know Jerome ain't stupid forever. What are you doing out there?" Her answer was sharp, almost cold. "He's safe. That's all he needs to be." The cousin stormed off, unsettled, realizing Jerome was walking blind into a storm he couldn't see. By early 2014, Jerome was already planning his future with her. He skipped nights out, saved every dollar, and confided in his grandmother about wanting to propose. The old woman looked at him with tired eyes and asked, "Baby, are you sure she love you like you love her?" Jerome answered without hesitation, "Yes, ma'am. She just doesn't show it the way others do." His conviction silenced her, but deep down she feared what was coming. Spring brought the news that changed everything. She was pregnant. Jerome's face lit up with joy. He told his co-workers proudly, rushed to buy tiny baby clothes, and set money aside for a crib. He believed it was the blessing that would finally secure their love. She, however, felt nothing but panic, because she knew the truth. Jerome wasn't the father. The affair had already gone too far. When she confessed the pregnancy to her mother, the response was immediate. "You will marry Jerome," her mother said, her tone flat and unforgiving. "A child without a father brings shame. Do you want people talking about us? About me?" The young woman hesitated, but eventually nodded. The affair would stay buried. Jerome would believe the child was his, and marriage would cover the scandal. On a rainy Friday night in June 2014, Jerome knelt down in the backyard where they first met. His voice shook as he held out a modest ring. "I don't have much, but I'll give you everything I got. Will you be my wife?" She smiled faintly, whispered yes, and let him slide the ring on her finger. To the family clapping around them, it was a love story. To Jerome, it was the happiest night of his life. But to her, it was a contract built on lies. The stepfather's shadow. Harold came into her life at a time when her mother was desperate for stability. He wasn't flashy, but he was consistent. He worked steady hours in construction, always smelled faintly of sweat and sawdust, and kept his shoes lined neatly by the door. To the community, Harold was dependable. To her mother, he was a second chance. And to the young woman, he was supposed to be a stepfather, nothing more. But trust has layers, and once blurred, those lines are rarely repaired. When Jerome first met Harold, he was trying to make a good impression. It was a Sunday morning in late 2012, and Jerome had come to pick her up for church. He wore his best pressed shirt, carrying the nervous energy of a man who wanted to be taken seriously. Harold answered the door, his frame filling the space. His handshake was firm, lingering just long enough to test Jerome's grip. "So, you're the one chasing after my stepdaughter?" Harold said, voice flat, but eyes scanning him. Jerome forced a smile. "Yes, sir. Just trying to take her to service." Harold tilted his head, gave a thin smirk, and replied, "Service? That's good. Keep her on the right path." Jerome didn't catch the edge in his tone, but later when he told his grandmother about the meeting, she shook her head. "Men like that don't smile without a reason. Watch him." Jerome dismissed it. His mind was on love, not suspicion. Inside the home, Harold controlled the atmosphere without raising his voice. He wasn't affectionate with his wife, but he carried authority that no one questioned. He paid bills on time, reminded everyone what they owed him, and often said things like, "If it weren't for me, y'all would be drowning." That dominance created a strange kind of loyalty in the household, a loyalty mixed with fear. He wasn't the man who yelled. He was the man whose silence could choke a room. It began with words disguised as compliments. "You're looking more grown these days," he'd say, lingering in the doorway of her room. Or, "Boys your age don't know how to treat a woman. Don't waste your time on paper." It sounded almost protective, but the way his eyes lingered, the way his voice lowered when he spoke, said something else entirely. At first, she brushed it off. Then one night, her phone buzzed with a message from him just after midnight. Still awake, she hesitated, then replied. Conversation started. Soon after, he was knocking on her door when her mother was asleep. What followed was not a whirlwind romance. It was manipulation. Harold convinced her that secrecy bound them together. "You think anyone else would understand us? They wouldn't. People would judge you. But me? I know you. I see you," he whispered. She hated herself for believing him. Yet the flattery filled a space Jerome never touched. With Jerome, love was steady and kind. With Harold, it was forbidden, risky, and twisted into a form of control. And that imbalance made her vulnerable. Jerome never suspected a thing. On evenings when he came by with flowers or groceries, Harold sometimes sat on the porch, watching him with quiet contempt. Jerome would greet him warmly. "Evening, sir." Harold nodded, barely lifting his eyes from the bottle in his hand. To Harold, Jerome was weak, a boy chasing after a woman who already belonged to him in ways Jerome couldn't imagine. That smugness never reached Jerome, but investigators would later see it as one of the ugliest dynamics of the case. The husband and the stepfather crossing paths, one oblivious, the other enjoying his secret. The secrecy grew reckless. Motel visits on the south side of town, coded texts that looked harmless if glanced at, lies about errands and study sessions. But secrecy leaves traces. And in December 2013, her cousin saw what wasn't meant to be seen. She spotted her outside a roadside motel and confronted her later. "Don't play with me," the cousin snapped. "Jerome's not stupid. You're going to break that boy's heart. What are you even doing with him?" The young woman's voice was cold, dismissive. "He's safe. That's all he needs to be." The cousin shook her head, walked away unsettled, and years later told police it was the moment she knew something was deeply wrong. The pregnancy revealed. Then came spring 2014. She missed a period. Her stomach tightened with dread. At first, she told herself it was stress, but when the doctor's test confirmed pregnancy, the walls closed in. She sat in silence, staring at the result, her breath shallow. Panic made her knees weak. She knew the truth. Jerome was not the father. When she told Harold one evening in the living room, he didn't comfort her. He leaned forward, eyes sharp, voice cold. "You can't put this on me. Do you hear me? You got that boy chasing you. You better make it his. Ain't nobody going to believe you if you say something different." She stared at him, tears welling, whispering, "But Harold, what if somebody finds out?" His reply cut her short. "Then you'll learn to keep your mouth shut. That's how you protect yourself." 2 days later, she told her mother. The kitchen was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Her mother froze, then gripped the counter so tightly her knuckles whitened. "Finally," she said, "this will not ruin us. You hear me? You will marry Jerome. A child without a father brings shame. Do you want people whispering about me? About us?" Her daughter shook her head, crying, "Mama, you don't know what he's done to me." But her mother's hand slammed against the counter. "Enough. This family survives by what people think of us, not by the truth. Jerome will be the father." End of discussion. And so the decision was sealed. The affair would stay buried. Jerome, blind in his devotion, would step into a role crafted from lies. Every kiss she gave him after that moment was rehearsed. Every smile was staged, and every step forward in their relationship carried the weight of a secret no one dared to confront. Building a life on lies. By the summer of 2014, Jerome's entire life revolved around the woman he loved and the child he believed was his. At the auto shop, he stayed past closing, his hands black with grease, his back aching, saving every extra dollar for their future. To his co-workers, he beamed with pride. "I'm about to be a father. Everything I do now is for them." They clapped him on the shoulder, proud of his determination. But Jerome didn't know the full truth. That every hour of labor he put in was covering a secret she was desperate to keep buried. Her manipulation was subtle, never loud, always woven into words he wanted to hear. One late night in July when he nervously asked, "You sure this baby's mine? You sure I'm enough for you?" She cupped his face, forcing a tear into her voice. "Of course it's yours, Jerome. Who else would it be? You're all I need." That lie, spoken with steady eyes, disarmed him completely. Jerome wasn't a man who doubted love. He was a man who trusted it blindly, and she played that trust like a violin. Her mother had drilled her in advance. Don't hesitate. Don't blink. If he questions you, you answer firmly. Don't let him see fear, or he'll know something's wrong. So she rehearsed, and when Jerome pressed her with questions, she delivered the words with precision, her face calm while her stomach churned. For Jerome, her reassurances were gospel. For her, they were survival. By early fall, Jerome had decided. He bought a modest ring, one he could barely afford, but it carried all his pride. On a rainy Friday in September, he knelt in the backyard where they first met. His voice trembled. "I don't have much, but I'll give you everything I got. Will you marry me?" She hesitated just long enough to feel the weight of guilt claw at her chest. For a flicker of a second, her throat tightened, the lie almost slipping. But then her mother's warning echoed in her head, and she forced out a smile, whispering, "Yes." Jerome's face lit with tears of joy. Family members clapped. To everyone there, it was a love story. To her, it was a contract. To Harold, who stood silently in the shadows, it was a triumph that no one else could see. In the weeks that followed, Jerome poured himself into wedding preparations. He dragged his cousin's suit shopping, picked hymns for the ceremony, and told his grandmother proudly, "I finally found the woman who makes me whole." His grandmother smiled, but carried unease. One night she warned him, "Baby, marriage is heavy. Don't carry it alone. Make sure she gives back what you give her." Jerome replied, "She already has. She's giving me a child." His faith silenced her doubts, though in her heart she feared he was being led somewhere he couldn't see. Meanwhile, her excitement wasn't about vows, but appearances. She obsessed over dresses, photographers, and a guest list stacked with names that made her feel important. Her friends whispered behind her back. At one fitting, one of them leaned over and muttered, "She doesn't look in love. She just looks determined." It was true, determined to protect her image, determined to keep the lie intact. The wedding. The wedding took place on a cool Saturday in November. The church smelled of lilies and old wood. Jerome stood at the altar, trembling, waiting for the doors to open. When she appeared in white, every guest rose to their feet. Jerome's chest swelled with pride. She walked gracefully, smiling, but inside she was torn. For a fleeting moment, her eyes darted to Harold in the back pew. He didn't smile, but his presence was loud enough to make her hands shake. The vows unfolded like theater. Jerome's voice cracked with emotion. "I promise to love you, honor you, and protect you, for better or worse, till death do us part." He meant every word. When it was her turn, she spoke the same line smoothly, but her heart thudded with guilt. For a split second, her voice wavered on, "till death do us part," a hesitation so small no one noticed. But later, when detectives reviewed testimonies, a bridesmaid recalled thinking, it was like she almost choked on the words. At the reception, Harold made his move. He sat quietly in the corner at first, drinking, eyes fixed on Jerome. When Jerome passed by, Harold stood, clapped his shoulder, and said with a smirk, "You got yourself a good one. Not everybody can hold on to her." Jerome laughed, taking it as a compliment, replying, "Thank you, sir. I'm blessed." But in hindsight, those words carried venom, a private mockery disguised as fatherly banter. Investigators would later flag that line as Harold's subtle taunt, proof of how deeply he enjoyed Jerome's ignorance. Jerome couldn't stop smiling that night. He leaned close to his bride during the reception, whispering, "We made it. I told you I'd give you the life you deserve." She clinked her glass against his, but her hand trembled under the table. Every cheer from the crowd felt like applause for a performance she couldn't step out of. To her mother, it was a relief. To Harold, it was conquest. To Jerome, it was love fulfilled. Later that night, Jerome carried her across the threshold of their small apartment, whispering, "This is our beginning." His voice was filled with hope. She closed her eyes, kissed him back, but in her mind, one question gnawed. How long could a lie this big stay hidden? The facade of family life. From the outside, their home looked steady. Family photos lined neatly on the mantel, Sunday service clothes pressed on hangers, and a little girl's drawings taped to the refrigerator door. To neighbors, they seemed ordinary. Jerome kissing his wife on the cheek before heading to the shop, her walking their daughter to daycare, the family bowing heads together at church. But inside, the silence between them grew louder with every passing year, filled with questions Jerome never asked, and lies she learned to answer too smoothly. Jerome believed every marriage had rough patches, and he told himself love is choosing each other every day, no matter what. For him, devotion was the cure for doubt. For her, it was a cover she had to maintain. Jerome lived his vows with the kind of faithfulness that made his friends call him old school. He woke early to make breakfast, folded laundry after 12-hour shifts, and built his schedule around his daughter's needs. When the baby cried at 2 a.m. on a Monday in February 2016, he whispered, "I got her. Go back to sleep," and walked the hall with the infant resting against his chest until her breathing calmed. When she took her first steps that September, he called out with such joy that the neighbors laughed from their porch as his voice carried across the parking lot. At daycare, teachers praised him for never missing a pickup. Even on days when storms flooded the streets, Jerome smiled and said, That's my job, to be there. His pride in fatherhood showed in every small act. Money was always tight, but Jerome faced it with grit. On a Tuesday evening in March 2017, when the electricity bill spiked, he sold a set of rims he had saved for, telling the buyer, "Family comes first, always." At the auto shop, he worked weekends, taking in extra brake jobs for cash. His coworker Jalen teased him during a Thursday lunch. "Man, you don't live for yourself no more." And Jerome laughed. "Nah, I live for them." He bought a swing set from a yard sale in 2017, stayed up late sanding it down, and surprised his daughter on her birthday. She squealed, "Daddy, push me higher." And he thought there was no greater reward. She maintained her routines too, but hers carried weight Jerome never saw. At night, when the house was still, she often sat awake, staring at the ceiling until 3 a.m., the glow of her phone the only light in the room. She kept it on silent, face down on the nightstand, and more than once Jerome woke to the faint vibration and asked sleepily, "Everything okay?" She would answer, "Just a reminder, nothing important," before rolling over, but her hands shook when she set the phone back down. Her daughter once caught her crying in the kitchen on a Wednesday afternoon in 2018. When Jerome asked about it later, she shrugged. "I'm just tired." He kissed her temple and said nothing more, unaware that exhaustion wasn't from parenting, but from balancing two lives. Harold never disappeared from the picture. He lingered at family gatherings, kept his voice low, and dropped coded remarks that seemed harmless to everyone else. At Thanksgiving 2016, he raised a paper cup and said, "To a family that knows how to keep each other together," staring directly at her while Jerome lifted their daughter onto his shoulders. In July 2017, he showed up at their apartment to drop something off and handed Jerome a toolbox he claimed he didn't need. Jerome shook his hand warmly. "Appreciate that, sir." Harold smirked, replying, "A man got to make sure his family's taken care of." Jerome took it as encouragement, but investigators would later circle those words in interviews as evidence of Harold's mocking presence. Even the daughter noticed his visits, once asking, "Why does Grandpa come when Daddy's not home?" The mother's face tightened as she snapped, "Don't ask that again." Her phone was the hinge of her secrets. By 2018, she had mastered tricks that kept Jerome from discovering anything. Hiding threads in notes apps, setting special ringtones that never made a sound, deleting messages at the first sign of suspicion. On Friday nights, she claimed to need long baths with music playing, but the timings matched Harold's free hours. Once at 10:45 p.m. on a Friday, Jerome knocked on the bathroom door. "Are you okay in there?" he asked. She answered quickly, "Yeah, just washing my hair." He walked away, never suspecting she was sitting on the floor with earbuds in, whispering into the phone. Her stress cracks showed up in other ways: short tempers, distracted stares, and the habit of biting her nails until they bled. When Jerome noticed and said gently, "Baby, you got to stop doing that. You hurting yourself," she pulled her hand back and said, "It's nothing." Jerome remained blind, not because he ignored the signs, but because he chose love over suspicion. His grandmother's voice stayed with him. On a Sunday in April 2018, she warned, "You give too much without asking what you get back, Jerome. Don't let her silence answer for love." He smiled. "She gave me a daughter, Nana. That's all the answer I need." His faith was his shield, even as the cracks widened around him. The anniversary preparation. The lead-up to their 5th anniversary in November 2019 brought subtle shifts. On Monday, November 4th, she told her mother, "We'll keep it small, just family." And her mother replied, "Small is good, but neat. Keep it neat." On Wednesday, November 6th, Jerome borrowed a stock pot from a neighbor, laughing, "We got a crowd coming Saturday. Can't be short on stew." The neighbor waved, "You're always feeding folks, Jerome." On Thursday night, November 7th, she met Harold in a grocery store parking lot. He handed her a sealed envelope, muttering, "Don't let this get sloppy." She tucked it into her purse, and when she got home, she deleted a message thread and stared at the blank screen until her hands stopped shaking. Jerome moved through the week like a man preparing for joy. He scribbled a grocery list on the back of a receipt, whispering, "I want this perfect," and kissed his daughter on the forehead each night before checking the envelope labeled anniversary, where he had saved bills for months. On Friday, November 8th, he asked her, "You want your mama's favorite on the table?" She answered, "She likes anything you cook," her voice too quick, her eyes sliding away. He didn't notice. That night at 8:40 p.m., he stirred a pot of sauce, tasting it, whispering, Yeah, that'll do. Then washed dishes with a smile. At 9:15 p.m., he paused at his daughter's door, watching her sleep, murmuring, 5 years means something. A line that he carried like prayer. The discovery. The morning of Saturday, November 9th, 2019, started with cartoons and the scrape of knives against cutting boards. Jerome hummed while chopping onions, his daughter coloring at the table. She moved around him, checking her phone every few minutes, locking the screen with a thumbprint so quickly it looked rehearsed. At 11:20 a.m., the little girl knocked over a cup of water, and a thin stream slid across the counter toward the phone. Watch it, baby, Jerome said gently, drying it off. By 1:05 p.m., he joked, if it acts up, I'll throw it in rice. And she snapped, it's not that serious, her tone sharper than usual. He kissed her cheek, choosing calm. By late afternoon, the food was nearly ready, and Jerome set out plates with precision, laying extra forks because someone always asked for more. At 5:35 p.m., her mother texted, on our way. And she typed back, see you soon. At 6:02 p.m., Jerome picked up her phone again, cheerful, saying, let me check this thing ain't holding water under the case. The screen lit up in his hand. A preview line appeared, just one sentence pinned to the top of a conversation. He froze. The kitchen clock ticked twice. From the doorway, his daughter asked, Daddy, can I have more juice? And he answered softly, yeah, baby, without looking away. At 6:03 p.m., the phone buzzed again, carrying the words that would split his world in half. The phone buzzed again at 6:03 p.m., glowing faintly in Jerome's palm. He had only meant to check if water had slipped under the case, nothing more. But what appeared on the screen wasn't a warning about moisture or a casual notification. It was a sentence pinned at the top of a conversation he'd never seen. You are lucky to have him as your husband despite everything, including Mia's pregnancy. The words stopped him cold. His chest seized tight. He read it again, as if the letters might rearrange into something less damning. But they didn't. They remained the same. Mia's pregnancy. His wife's name attached to a truth he was never meant to know. The kitchen, alive with the sounds of pots simmering and a child coloring at the table, seemed to collapse into silence. Even the hum of the refrigerator fell away, leaving Jerome alone with the sentence that split his life in two. He whispered it under his breath, testing the words as if they might change. Mia's pregnancy. His daughter tugged on his sleeve, her voice soft and innocent. Daddy, can I have more juice? He blinked, forcing himself back into the room. He smiled at her, steady, his voice calm. Of course, baby. He poured the juice with careful hands, his movements measured, his expression warm, hiding the storm building inside his chest. He set the phone back on the counter, face down, and wiped his palms on a towel. The weight of betrayal pressed against his ribs, but his face betrayed nothing. He stirred the pot on the stove slowly, humming under his breath like any man preparing for a family dinner, but his thoughts spun like a wheel thrown off balance. 5 years of devotion, of sacrifice, of trust, all undercut by a secret she carried in silence. He remembered late nights when she guarded her phone, Harold's quiet smirks at family gatherings, the sharpness in her voice when he'd offered to dry it off earlier. All the pieces lined up now, cruel and undeniable. At 6:07 p.m., she stepped back into the kitchen. Her eyes flicked toward the phone lying near the sink. Is it still acting up? She asked, her tone too casual, her smile forced at the edges. Jerome turned to her, his face calm, his voice steady. It's working just fine. The words landed with a weight she didn't notice. She reached for a spoon, tasted the stew, and nodded. Needs a little more salt. Jerome leaned in, kissed her cheek gently, and whispered, You're right. On the outside, it was affection. On the inside, it was confirmation. She was right where he needed her to be. The calm before. The minutes ticked forward. At 6:20 p.m., Jerome laid out extra forks, adjusted napkins, and smoothed the tablecloth. His daughter skipped through the living room with crayons, laughing as she dragged a toy across the floor. Mia moved around the kitchen, but her energy was restless. She dropped a plate at one point, catching it just before it shattered, laughing nervously. Almost broke Mama's dish. Jerome only nodded, his calm making her glance at him twice, uneasy without knowing why. She checked her phone again at 6:30 p.m., tapping her thumbprint quickly, her hand trembling just enough for him to notice. He said nothing, though the silence between them grew thick. At 6:45 p.m., a knock sounded at the door, and family voices filled the hallway. Jerome straightened his shirt, drew in a deep breath, and opened the door with a wide smile. "Welcome, welcome," he said warmly, hugging his mother, his cousins, and his in-laws. Laughter filled the apartment as coats were hung and children darted toward the living room. His wife greeted her mother with a quick embrace, whispering something too low for anyone else to hear. Jerome caught her eye across the room, holding her gaze a second too long. She looked away quickly, her cheeks flushed, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her dress. As guests filled the table, Jerome moved like the perfect host. He refilled glasses, cracked small jokes, and asked after people's weeks. To anyone watching, it was a man celebrating 5 years of marriage with family gathered close. But Jerome's mind never left the words on that screen. Each time someone said, "You've built something beautiful," or "Your little girl looks just like you," the phrase Mia's pregnancy burned hotter in his chest. He smiled through it all, masking the truth with warmth. His calm presence was praised, but to him, it felt like armor. At 7:05 p.m., while serving plates, Jerome overheard his wife's cousin tease her. "Girl, you're lucky to have Jerome. He spoils you." She laughed too loudly, too quickly, brushing it off with, "He's a good man." Jerome watched her closely, the way her eyes darted away from him before she sat down. The sentence in his head echoed louder. "You are lucky to have him, despite everything." It wasn't just a message. It was a verdict written by someone who knew the truth he had been denied. His mother noticed his stillness at one point, asking softly, "Son, you okay? You seem quiet tonight." Jerome smiled, kissed her cheek, and said, "I'm just taking it all in, Ma. 5 years, that means something." His mother squeezed his hand, proud of his devotion, never suspecting the storm beneath. At 7:42 p.m., Jerome excused himself briefly, stepping into the kitchen to check the pot. Alone, he pressed both palms against the counter, staring at his reflection in the microwave door. His eyes were dark, unblinking, holding back a rage he dared not unleash in front of family. He whispered under his breath, "Mia's pregnancy, not mine." The words felt heavy, final. He thought of the proposal in the rain, of the vows she'd spoken, of Harold's mocking toast at Thanksgiving 3 years earlier. Every piece of the puzzle was clear now. She had deceived him. She had made him raise another man's child, and worse, the man was her stepfather. He straightened, forcing calm back over his face, and returned to the table with a smile. "Let's make a toast," he said suddenly. The family lifted their glasses, smiling, waiting for his words. Jerome raised his cup, his voice strong but even. "To 5 years, to my family, to choosing love every day, no matter what it costs." The room echoed with cheers, glasses clinking together, laughter spilling out. His wife raised her glass too, smiling brightly, but Jerome's eyes never left hers. In that moment, his calm smile was not a celebration. It was a warning. The confession. By 9:40 p.m., the apartment was quiet again. Plates stacked by the sink, chairs pushed in, the sound of laughter gone with the last guests. Jerome tucked his daughter into bed at 9:27, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Sleep tight. Daddy loves you." She smiled in her half-sleep, unaware that her father's heart was being crushed in the room beyond. When Jerome returned to the dining table, his wife was clearing plates, her phone tucked in her apron pocket. She hummed faintly, but her hands fidgeted, as if she sensed the calm in the room wasn't the same calm from earlier. Jerome sat down slowly at the table, folding his hands. His voice was quiet but firm. "Mia, sit down." She froze, a plate halfway to the sink, and turned toward him. His eyes were steady, his tone flat, not raised, not angry, worse measured. She set the plate down and lowered herself into the chair across from him, her fingers twitching against her lap. Jerome leaned forward slightly, his voice deliberate. "I saw a message tonight. I wasn't looking for it, but I saw it." Her breath caught in her throat. "What message?" Her words came too fast. Jerome repeated the line exactly as he read it. "You are lucky to have him as your husband despite everything, including Mia's pregnancy." The room fell still. She blinked once, twice, before her face cracked, tears spilling before she could stop them. Her body shook as she whispered, "Jerome, please." He sat in silence, his hands still. She broke first, crumbling under the weight. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I was young. I was scared. Mama said we couldn't let anyone know. She said marrying you was the only way to protect us." Her voice cracked harder. "It was Harold. I didn't want it. I swear to you, I didn't want it. But he had power over me. He said if I told anyone, he'd ruin us. Please, Jerome." She grabbed the edge of the table with trembling fingers, as if holding on to the wood could keep her steady. Jerome's eyes narrowed slightly. So you lied to me for 5 years, every day, every night. His voice didn't rise, but the coldness in it was sharper than any shout. She sobbed harder. I didn't have a choice. I was trapped. It only happened once. I swear it was only once. And when I found out, I thought about ending it all. But Mama said no. She said the shame would destroy us. She told me to marry you, that you were kind, that you'd never leave. I listened to her. I did what she told me. I never wanted to hurt you. She reached across the table with a shaking hand, trying to touch him. Jerome let her fingers brush his wrist, but didn't move. He sat there, silent, making her squirm. Finally, he covered her hand with his own, but his grip was firm, almost unnatural, holding her still. She looked up at him desperately. You've been a good man, the best man. She loves you more than anyone. You've raised her like your own, and she is yours, Jerome, in the ways that matter. Please don't take that from her. Please don't take that from us. His eyes stayed fixed on hers, unblinking. Then slowly he let out a breath. A small smile touched his lips, soft and deliberate. I love you, Mia. I love her, and I forgive you. She broke completely at those words, collapsing into sobs. Relief poured from her in waves. She covered her mouth with her hands, whispering, Thank you, God. Thank you, Jerome. She stood quickly and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face against his chest, his shirt soaked with her tears as she repeated, I thought you'd leave me. I thought you'd hate me forever. He stroked her hair slowly, whispering in her ear, It's all right. We'll get through this. No one has to know. To her, it was redemption. To Jerome, it was theater. At 10:12 p.m., he led her into the bedroom, holding her hand gently, speaking softly like a husband renewing vows. She kept whispering through tears, I only wanted to protect her. I didn't mean for it to go on this long. I thought it would stay buried forever. He nodded, kissing her temple, saying, You're safe with me. We'll move past this. She clung to him, trembling, believing his words. His eyes, though, were flat, cold, detached, the eyes of a man who had already decided there was no moving past anything. By 10:45 p.m., the house was quiet. Their daughter slept soundly in the next room, and Mia lay across the bed, her body exhausted from crying. Jerome sat by the window, watching the street lamps flicker through the blinds. His mind replayed every second of her confession, every lie, every excuse, every time she tried to twist guilt into pity. He whispered to himself so low she couldn't hear, You believe you're safe. You think I'll carry this with you, but I won't. At 11:05 p.m., she stirred half awake, mumbling, Jerome, thank you for forgiving me. He turned toward her, his voice tender, his smile faint. Sleep, baby. Tomorrow's a new day. She sighed with relief, curling deeper into the blanket. Jerome kept watching her for a long time, his stillness darker than any rage. Before we continue, thank you for supporting this channel and keeping these stories alive. We grow because of you. By joining as a YouTube member, you'll get special perks, access to extra content, and help us keep sharing these stories. Your support makes all the difference, and we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. It's always powerful to see this community connected around the world. The final dinner. By Thursday, October 12th, 2017, the tension in the apartment was buried under a fragile peace. Mia truly believed the worst was behind them. She moved through the day lighter, her text to her mother filled with optimism. He forgave me. We'll be okay now. In her journal, she scribbled, I thought I'd lost him, but God gave us a second chance. To her, forgiveness was salvation. To Jerome, forgiveness was theater. His calm was rehearsed, his gestures deliberate, his mind already pacing ahead to the evening. At 7 p.m., Jerome set the table with all the familiar tokens of love. 2 flickering candles, a vase of red roses, and soft jazz spilling from the record player. He pressed his shirt crisp, polished the glasses until they gleamed, every detail meticulous. Mia stepped into the room in a pale blue dress, her face brightening at the sight. Jerome, you didn't have to do all this, she whispered, touched. He smiled, pulling her chair out smoothly. Of course I did. For us, for our future. She lowered herself into the chair, her heart swelling with gratitude. To her, this was proof his forgiveness was real. Dinner moved slowly, their words weaving between light laughter and shared memories. Jerome teased her about her high school days, and she laughed. Mr. Larkin always told me I'd talk my way into trouble one day. Jerome chuckled, raising his glass. Maybe he was right. From her side of the table, It looked like their marriage was alive again. From his, every smile was measured, every question calculated. He wasn't reliving their love. He was staging it. At 8:42 p.m., Jerome stood and slipped into the kitchen. He retrieved a small vial hidden earlier, one that contained a clear, tasteless liquid, a household poison easily masked in wine. He poured 2 glasses, one pure, one laced with the substance. He steadied his hand, breathed once, and returned with both. Setting one gently before her, he raised his own. "A toast," he said softly. She tilted her head. "To what?" His voice didn't waver. "To new beginnings." Her eyes flickered for just a moment, suspicion flashing across her face. "You're being different tonight, Jerome. So tender." He leaned closer, brushing her hand with his fingertips. "That's because I realized how close I came to losing everything. I don't ever want to feel that again." His words melted her hesitation, and she smiled, blinking back tears. She raised her glass, clinking it gently against his. "To us," she whispered. She hesitated briefly, the rim of the glass hovering near her lips. "This really feels like starting over," she murmured. Jerome nodded, his eyes steady. "That's exactly what it is." She drank. The wine was smooth, its richness hiding any trace of danger. Jerome sipped from his own untouched glass, his gaze locked on her. She set hers down, laughing lightly through tears. "You're scaring me, Jerome. You're too good to me tonight." He reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "Because you deserve it." By 9:22 p.m., Mia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She rubbed her temple, frowning. "Strange. I feel dizzy." Jerome leaned forward with calm concern. "Maybe it's the wine. You haven't eaten much today." She tried to rise, but her knees buckled. He caught her, lowering her gently back into the chair. His voice was soothing. "Relax, baby. Just breathe." She clutched at his arm, her eyes wide. "Jerome, what's happening to me?" He cupped her face, brushing her cheek with his thumb. His expression was tender, his voice steady. "Sure. I'm right here. Close your eyes." Her breaths quickened, panic setting in. "No, I don't. I don't understand." Her tears fell hot, streaking her face. He pressed his forehead against hers, whispering, "It's okay. You're safe with me." By 9:47 p.m., her body weakened further. She reached up with trembling fingers, gripping his shirt. "Please don't leave me." He kissed her forehead, murmuring softly, "I'll never leave you." She tried to smile, believing him, before her head dropped against his chest. Her breaths grew shallow, then slower, her voice fading into silence. Within minutes, she was limp in his arms. Jerome laid her carefully on the bed, brushing hair from her face as if tucking her into sleep. His calm never cracked. He whispered to himself, "Now you're free. And so am I." The candles burned low, shadows swaying across the walls. The record scratched faintly, spinning at the end of its track. At 10:01 p.m., he walked back into the kitchen. He rinsed the glasses, wiped the counter, and stacked the plates neatly. His movements were precise, methodical. Nothing rushed. From the outside, it was the picture of a husband cleaning after dinner. From inside, it was something else entirely. The preparation. At 10:14 p.m. on Friday night, the home was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the record needle scratching endlessly at the end of its groove. Jerome stood motionless in the kitchen doorway, staring at the counter where knives, onions, and a pot waited. Behind him in the bedroom, Mia lay still, her body resembling sleep to anyone who might wander in. But this was no sleep. For most men, this would have been the breaking point. For Jerome, it was a threshold crossed. Something inside him had snapped so completely that what he was about to do seemed less like horror and more like inevitability. He moved with purpose, tying an apron around his waist, washing his hands under cold water, drying them on a towel. These were the same motions he had done countless times before, cooking Sunday meals, preparing late-night dinners when his daughter would sit on the counter swinging her legs. For a moment, as the water dripped from his fingers, a memory pushed its way into his mind. His little girl's voice, cheerful and curious. "Daddy, what's for dinner tonight?" The question echoed against the silence of the kitchen, and Jerome froze. He shut his eyes briefly, then shook it away, muttering, "Dinner? That's all it is. Just dinner." At 10:28 p.m., he brought her from the bedroom into the kitchen. His face remained unreadable, his arms steady. To him, it was not his wife he was lifting, but the embodiment of years of betrayal, lies, and humiliation. He laid her across the counter with clinical precision, adjusting her as though she were part of the task at hand. The juxtaposition was unbearable. A man who once loved her now treating her body like an ingredient in a meal. He placed the largest pot on the stove, filled it halfway with water, and turned the burner high. Into it, he dropped salt, bay leaves, and oil. The sizzle that followed was familiar, almost comforting, and he whispered again under his breath, "This is just food." The sounds, the motions, they were automatic, rehearsed. He reached for a knife sharpened earlier in the week, its blade gleaming under the kitchen light. By 11 p.m., the first cuts echoed in the room, steel against the wooden board. His face never shifted. His breathing was even. To anyone watching, he would have looked like a man cooking late into the night. He added onions, garlic, and tomatoes, their rich scents filling the air. The ordinary aromas of family life, a stew simmering, a home alive with warmth, now cloaked a truth too monstrous to imagine. To an outsider walking past the apartment, it would have smelled inviting, wholesome, a sign of family togetherness. Jerome stirred the pot slowly, tasting the broth with a wooden spoon, nodding as if satisfied. Forensic investigators later noted the cruel irony. The dish itself smelled so normal that nothing from the kitchen would have alerted neighbors. He was careful, wiping the rim of the pot, rinsing utensils, and even spraying the counters with bleach after each step. He knew scents linger. He knew mess left evidence. By 11:45 p.m., the stew thickened. Jerome leaned against the counter, the steam rising, fogging his face. He whispered, "You'll be at the table tomorrow. You'll sit with them. You'll be part of the family dinner, just like you always wanted." His words were not shouted. They were tender, as though he truly believed them. He stirred again, the rhythm calm, his eyes distant. This was not anger anymore. It was numbness, a detachment so deep it blurred into ritual. Around midnight, he paused, his gaze drifting toward the hallway. He thought of his daughter asleep in her room. Another memory surfaced, Mia handing the girl a bowl of stew years earlier, laughing. "Careful, it's hot, but Daddy made it perfect." Jerome's jaw tightened, and his hand gripped the spoon harder. In that memory, there was warmth. In this kitchen, there was only cold calculation disguised as domestic routine. He set the spoon down with precision, as though the act itself was sacred. At 12:15 a.m., he began to scrub. Every counter was wiped twice, knives washed and dried, the cutting board rinsed and put away. He sprayed air freshener in the kitchen, muttering, "No trace. Nothing left." Detectives later pointed out the unusual level of cleanliness. Spotless surfaces, freshly bleached drains, no fingerprints on certain utensils. It was as though he knew someone would come looking, and he wanted them to find nothing. He returned to the stove, lowered the heat, and let the stew simmer. By 12:50 a.m., he sat at the kitchen table, staring at the covered pot. His eyes were steady, his breathing calm. He imagined tomorrow, the family gathered around the table, smiling, complimenting his cooking. "Jerome, this stew is incredible." He could almost hear them saying it. The thought curved his lips into the faintest smile. This was his revenge. Not loud or violent, but quiet, grotesque, and complete. At 1:05 a.m., he stirred once more. Satisfied with the texture, satisfied with the flavor, he whispered, "Now they'll know what lies taste like." He switched off the burner, covered the pot, and wiped the counter one final time. To anyone walking in the next morning, the kitchen would have looked immaculate. Nothing out of place, only a pot of stew cooling on the counter, waiting. The gathering. Saturday, October 13th, 2017, 6:15 p.m. Relatives began arriving, carrying bags of food, small gifts, and the hum of laughter that always filled a family gathering. Jerome opened the door, his smile polite, his shirt pressed, his tone warm. His mother-in-law was the first to ask, "Where's Mia?" "I thought she'd be here at the door." Jerome gave a soft chuckle, keeping his eyes steady. "She had to step out for a moment. She told me not to let anyone wait outside." The answer was accepted easily. Later, detectives would note that her mother's question marked the very first time anyone noticed Mia's absence. The house filled with noise, children running down the hallway, cousins joking about work, uncles swapping church announcements. The smell of stew pulled everyone toward the kitchen. One aunt leaned into the doorway, sniffing the air. "Lord, Jerome, you've been hiding your skills from us. This smells heavenly." Jerome turned from the stove, nodding. "I just wanted to do it right for today." As he stirred the pot, his hand trembled faintly, the spoon clinking harder than it should against the steel. He steadied himself quickly, glancing at the group to see if anyone had noticed. They hadn't. At 6:45 p.m., he announced, "Dinner's ready." The table filled fast, Bowls placed, bread passed around, glasses poured. Jerome ladled the stew with a steady rhythm, though his grip on the ladle tightened, so hard his knuckles whitened. When he set the first bowl in front of his daughter, she wrinkled her nose and pushed it slightly away. "Daddy, I don't want this right now." His heart skipped, but he smiled calmly, brushing her hair back. "Try a little, baby. You'll like it." She hesitated before finally taking a spoonful. To everyone else, it was an ordinary moment with a child reluctant about food. To Jerome, it was nearly a crack in the illusion. Compliments poured in within minutes. His sister-in-law laughed after her first bite. "You've been holding out on us. This is the best stew I've had in years." His brother-in-law slapped the table. "Man, you better write this recipe down. I'll pay for it." Jerome forced a soft smile. One day, his mother-in-law spooned her portion slowly, nodding. "Mia should be proud. She always bragged about how you looked after her and the baby." Jerome dropped his eyes to his bowl, then looked back up with the same calm mask. "She will be," he said evenly. At 7:20 p.m., his daughter leaned close again, tugging at his sleeve. "Daddy, when is Mommy coming back?" The room went quiet for a brief second, the kind of pause that falls when an innocent question pierces through chatter. Jerome bent down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "She'll be back soon, sweetheart. Just enjoy your dinner." The lie slid out smoothly. No hitch in his voice, no flicker in his expression. The table moved on, the moment forgotten, except it wasn't. It would be repeated later, word for word, when police interviewed each guest. By 7:45 p.m., bowls scraped empty. Children asked for seconds. Uncles teased about Jerome needing to open a restaurant, and glasses clinked in a toast. Jerome raised his own glass, his tone calm. "To my family." They repeated the words back, smiling, drinking, savoring the food he had placed before them. To them, it was a night of unity. To Jerome, it was the quiet climax of years of betrayal turned inside out. At 8:02 p.m., Jerome carried the nearly empty pot back to the kitchen. He rinsed the ladle, stacked the bowls, and glanced at the phone resting on the counter. From the living room came the sounds of laughter, his daughter's voice mixing with cousins, none of them sensing what had just taken place. Jerome wiped his hands on a towel, his eyes fixed on the phone. Soon the calm would break. Soon the house would hear a call no one expected. The call. At 9:12 p.m. on Saturday, October 13th, 2017, the laughter in the living room was beginning to quiet. Plates had been cleared. Children were sprawled across the carpet with toys, and conversations softened as the night stretched on. Jerome moved back into the kitchen, rinsing glasses, stacking bowls, and wiping the counter as if he were simply finishing a successful dinner party. To his guests, he looked calm, perhaps even proud of the evening. But inside, something was shifting. The performance of the devoted husband, the role of the gracious host, it had run its course. Now came the part where the truth pressed against him so forcefully he could no longer contain it. He stood over the phone, staring at it, his breath steady, his hands motionless. The voices in the other room carried on, but his ears no longer registered them. Finally, with a deliberate motion, he picked up the receiver, dialed 3 numbers, and pressed the phone to his ear. A dispatcher's voice answered quickly. 911, what is your emergency? For a moment, Jerome said nothing. His lips parted, but no sound emerged. Then, in a low, steady voice, he spoke words that would later shock the entire city. "I killed my wife, and I served her to the family in the stew they just ate." There was silence on the other end for a beat too long. The kind of silence that comes when someone thinks they misheard. The dispatcher's voice tightened. "Sir, can you repeat that? What did you just say?" Jerome's reply was chillingly clear. "She's gone. She's in the pot. They ate it. I made sure of it." His tone wasn't frantic. It wasn't angry. It was calm, almost matter-of-fact, the sound of a man detached from the horror of his own words. The dispatcher immediately asked for his location, his name, and the condition of the guests. Jerome answered each question like a man reading a grocery list. At 9:28 p.m., squad cars raced through the neighborhood, lights flashing, sirens cutting through the night. Inside the house, the family was still unaware. They laughed, they talked, the children bickered over toys. Jerome walked back into the living room, phone still in hand, his face pale but his expression controlled. His brother-in-law looked up. "Everything okay?" Jerome nodded once. "They're on their way," he said softly. The family didn't understand what he meant until the flashing lights appeared through the blinds. When the first officers stepped inside at 9:34 p.m., they were greeted by the sight of a warm family gathering. The smell of stew still hung in the air, bowls half filled on the coffee table, breadcrumbs scattered across plates. Jerome stood in the middle of the room, his hands raised slightly, his voice calm. "I need to be arrested," he said simply. His mother-in-law looked confused. "Jerome, what are you talking about? Where's Mia?" The officer closest to her asked everyone to remain seated, his hand resting near his holster. Jerome's voice cut through again. "She's not coming back. She's already here. You've all eaten her." The room erupted. His sister-in-law gasped, covering her mouth. A cousin shouted, "What the hell are you saying?" The children froze, their laughter turning into stunned silence. An officer stepped forward, grabbing Jerome's wrist, twisting his arms behind him, snapping cold handcuffs into place. As he was pulled toward the door, he looked back once at the family, his face blank. "I told the truth," he muttered. "I couldn't keep it anymore." His daughter's voice cracked as she screamed, "Daddy!" But he didn't turn back again. By 9:48 p.m., detectives arrived, securing the scene. Officers moved into the kitchen, lifting the pot from the stove, their faces shifting from disbelief to horror as they confirmed what Jerome had said. One officer whispered under his breath, "Dear God," before covering his mouth and stepping back. Detectives photographed the counters, bagged utensils, and marked every spot Jerome had cleaned. The contrast between the spotless surfaces and the horror inside the pot was almost too much to comprehend. Neighbors gathered outside, drawn by the flashing lights and shouts. Inside, the family sat together, shock setting in. Some wept, others whispered in disbelief, replaying every moment of the dinner. The grandmother shook uncontrollably, repeating, "No, no, no," as an officer tried to calm her. The children clung to one another, their innocent questions. "Where's Mommy?" now heavy with the weight of a truth too gruesome for them to understand. At 10:02 p.m., Jerome was led into the back of a patrol car, his wrists bound, his expression as calm as it had been when he poured the first glass of poisoned wine. The family sat inside the house, staring at empty bowls, their stomachs turning as the reality began to settle. The neighborhood lights flickered across the street, the hum of conversation rising outside. And in the middle of it all, a pot of stew sat on the counter, covered and cooling, the silent witness to a crime that would never be forgotten. The trial. The case against Jerome moved swiftly. Forensics established the framework. The sedative compound was found in his wife's bloodstream, traces of bleach lingered in the drain, and his browser history revealed late-night searches for how long before sedatives take effect in wine. These weren't the signs of a sudden outburst. They were the blueprint of intent. But the courtroom is where the real reckoning unfolded. On November 22, 2021, Fulton County Superior Court opened its doors to a packed gallery. Reporters filled the benches, sketch. Artists traced every detail of Jerome's face, and the family sat with folded arms, bracing for what they were about to relive. The prosecutor rose first, her voice clear and deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not about a man who lost his temper. It is about a man who plotted. He searched, he prepared, and he executed. And then he served his crime to the very people who trusted him most." She paused, letting the words echo. This was not madness. This was method. The defense countered with a softer angle, appealing to the jury's empathy. Jerome Davis is not a monster. He is a man driven to the edge by betrayal most of us cannot imagine. When the foundation of his marriage collapsed, when the truth of that child was laid bare, his mind broke. He did not plan this for gain. He acted from a place of unbearable pain. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not premeditated evil. It is a tragedy of the human heart. Detectives took the stand, their testimony unwavering. One investigator described retrieving the pot from the stove, his words measured but haunted. "I've been in homicide 20 years. I've seen cruelty in many forms. But the silence in that kitchen, it was different. It was almost peaceful, like he'd already accepted what he did." The most difficult moment came when the cousin who attended the anniversary dinner was sworn in. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "He told us she stepped out for a minute. We laughed. We ate. We clinked glasses. And now I can't close my eyes at night without thinking. What did I put in my mouth? What did I swallow?" Gasps rippled through the gallery, and even the judge lowered his eyes before calling for order. When it was his turn, Jerome showed no hesitation. He looked at the jury and said evenly, "I didn't lose control. I chose control. For 5 years, I was lied to. I forgave her once, but some lies are too big. You call it murder. I call it truth finally being served." The words landed like a hammer, and several jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The judge, an older man with decades on the bench, leaned forward, his voice stern but steady. "Mr. Davis, whether this jury finds you guilty of premeditated murder or not, let there be no mistake. The law does not bend to heartbreak. It answers to justice." The courtroom was packed from the first day, a crush of reporters, cameras, and curious neighbors pressing in for a glimpse of the man whose crime had shocked the community. Every seat was filled, and the gallery buzzed until the judge's gavel brought silence. The atmosphere was thick with tension, every word and gesture dissected by the media waiting outside. Family members sat in the front row, torn between rage, grief, and disbelief. Their faces broadcast across evening news programs under headlines like the Anniversary Murder Trial. The prosecution wasted no time establishing motive and method. The state's attorney held up a folder and said, "This was not sudden. This was calculated. He searched, he planned, he poisoned, and then he forced an entire family to consume the evidence." Witnesses took the stand. Detectives describing what they found in the kitchen, the medical examiner explaining how the sedatives worked, and relatives recounting the horror of learning what they had eaten. One cousin broke down under questioning, whispering through tears, "I can still taste it. I can't get it out of my head." The defense tried to soften the edges, painting Jerome as a man undone by years of betrayal. "This was not the act of a monster," his attorney argued. "This was the act of a man whose heart had been shattered. He was lied to for 5 years about the child he loved. He was humiliated, broken, and his mind snapped." They called a psychiatrist who testified that Jerome showed signs of severe trauma and depression. But on cross-examination, the prosecutor pressed, "Trauma does not search Google at 3:14 a.m. for the effects of sedatives. Trauma does not measure doses. Trauma does not stir a pot with calm precision." Jerome himself took the stand, his demeanor steady, voice measured. "I loved her," he said. "I loved her more than anything, but she made a fool out of me. She let me raise another man's child and laughed behind my back. I didn't lose control. I chose control." His words drew gasps, and the jurors shifted uncomfortably, some glancing at the family in the gallery. The judge instructed them to disregard emotion, but the weight of the statement lingered. Closing arguments sharpened the lines. The prosecution called him a man who turned love into a weapon. The defense pleaded for mercy, asking the jury to see a broken heart, not a cold killer. When the jury retired, the room held its breath. Hours stretched into the evening until finally, at 9:42 p.m., the foreman returned. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree." Cries broke out from the family. Jerome sat still, eyes fixed forward, as if the words had confirmed what he already knew. The aftermath. The verdict did not bring peace. The family who once gathered around a table now avoided each other, bound together by shame but separated by grief. Some blamed the wife for her choices. Others blamed Jerome for his brutality. But all carried the same unbearable truth, that they had shared in the final act without knowing it. At night, relatives admitted to waking in terror, tasting food they could no longer eat. "I can't sit at a table without seeing her face," one aunt confessed during a televised interview. Public judgment was merciless. Newspapers debated whether the crime was proof of a broken man or evidence of a hidden monster. Talk shows dissected betrayal, marriage, and trust, turning their private nightmare into national conversation. For the community, it became a cautionary tale whispered in churches and family gatherings. Love can deceive, trust can collapse, and lies can destroy not just one marriage, but an entire circle of lives. Inside prison, Jerome was placed under suicide watch. Guards described him as calm, methodical, and eerily polite. One officer reported him saying, "I didn't just lose a wife. I lost my dignity. Now the world knows why I took it back." Psychologists labeled him dangerous, not because of rage, but because of how rational he seemed in explaining the irrational. He kept to himself, writing long notes no one was allowed to see, speaking only when addressed. The moral questions remained for everyone who followed the case. Did betrayal justify his monstrous act, or was the darkness always there, waiting for a reason to surface? Was he a man pushed too far, or a killer who simply found his excuse? These questions echoed in the minds of the family, the jury, and the public, leaving scars that would never truly heal. In the end, it wasn't just a marriage that died at that dinner table. It was trust, family, and the very idea of love as protection. Jerome's crime leaves us with a single question that refuses to fade. When betrayal shatters the foundation of your life, do you walk away, or do you burn everything with it? The answer is different for each of us, but his choice left scars that no verdict could erase. Thanks for watching.